Right, well you've caught me on this one and I've already started. As you can see, I've certainly done the tonal sketch, and what you can see here is a place called Gold Hill. But that's what we're going to do now, largely because first of all we've got a very severe perspective going down, but also you'll probably notice we haven't got any sky in this either, and yet even without a sky I'm going to show you how easy it is to create a very sunny and summery sort of scene. And one thing I also want you to notice is, even though the street goes spectacularly downhill, if we take a relatively straight line, we'll take this brush, have a look at that. The angle of the line that goes down the hill isn't very much at all. What really creates the steepness is this, the angle of the perspective, because our eye line is actually around about here, level with the tops of these chimneys. So everything in fact is below us, and therefore all the perspective lines virtually drop down below us. But one final thing I wanted to show you, if you think that this is going to be an extremely difficult thing to draw, then again don't worry, because the downloadable line drawing is going to help you out. But if you have a look at these individual cottages, all they are is a whole series of boxes that are put next to each other, gradually going downhill. In fact, if I get a piece of white paper, I've got my little piece of acetate here underneath, and you can see that that is all that's involved in drawing these very steeply angled houses. Right, now we're going to have a go at the roofs, and as we've seen here, the first two are tiled roofs and the third one is a pan-tiled roof, with the fourth and fifth cottages being both covered by this lovely thatch. So we'll work our way down from left to right. Right, now you can see that I've mixed something that looks rather like a kaleidoscope of colours. It's mostly ultramarine blue and the raw umber, but we've introduced a little bit of the permanent rose, a little bit of the yellow ochre, and perhaps a little bit more blue just to darken off slightly, perhaps a little bit more brown as well. So we'll just put this colour in. Right, we'll let that dry. I'll move on to the next area now, and we'll lighten this off very slightly. Even though it's a dark colour, it's still pretty well light against dark, so I'm happy with that. Right, I've done the middle house here, which has got the pan tiles, same colours again, just a little bit more yellow ochre and permanent rose added, a little bit more white. Now I'm just going into the thatch, but what we're going to do before we actually finish off with the texture of thatch on this is to just give ourselves a hint of the way in which the roof is bending up and down. And you can see if the sun's coming from this direction, this part of the thatched roof is in shadow, this is in slight shadow, certainly this edge here is definitely in shadow. So you can see now how the hint of that thatched roof is starting to come out. Another little bit of dark blue, there we go, like that. Now if we go back into the same colour again, you can see like that, and add a little bit of yellow ochre just to lighten it, maybe just a tiny touch of white. You don't want too much white at this stage. There's the two little raised areas there. Like that. Another one perhaps just showing this edge up here. Right, you can see I've all but got to the end of the thatching bit. Next thing I'm going to do is to put in the individual walls, and really it's only exactly the same technique as I've done certainly with these roofs here. Okay, you can see with this beige one that I've just using the same brush that I've used on the roofs and I've mixed. It's basically the same colour as the thatch, except there's rather more white in it, just to give that slightly paler colour. The only thing I'm being careful of now is to make sure that I get the windows, or the base of the windows, reasonably correct and in perspective. Okay, you can see now that I've all but blocked in the cottages with a base colour. I'm just finishing this lowest cottage off. Next thing I'm going to do is to block in the windows, and I'm going to keep the windows here very simple, very straightforward. All I'm going to do is to paint in the sort of a white area, which is what most of the windows are, as you can see, with a white frame, and then just block in some blobs of bluey grey colour to represent the windows. Right, we're nearly there as far as the windows are concerned. Now, the next thing we're going to do is, for each window and door, is just put this blob of colour in to define where the windows are and roughly how many windows there are. But as I said before, it's going to be a very loose and quick attempt just to put an indication of windows in, and no more than that. Right, you can see that I'm just adding in a sort of a base blue-grey colour. It's actually this colour, which is little more than ultramarine blue, a little touch of white, and it's probably a little bit of raw umber that I've had on the brush already. I'm simply just using the flat of the brush and dragging it across. We'll do another one down here. These two here, for example. Do you see the way that when I drag sideways, I'm maintaining the perspective line, in that that side of the window frame finishes lower here than that. You can see there, that finishes there, that finishes there. In other words, it follows the line basically of the top and bottom of the window. I just wanted to put in a little bit of glaze across these windows here, just to represent the shadow underneath the eaves. Right, well, what I've done now, since I put the shadow lines under the eaves there, I've started to drag them down slightly, so that although there is a purpley line there that you can see, in fact, because this side of the building is in shadow, it's a line that I'm just sort of making a little more subtle. Right, we've put the 4 chimneys in now, just with a simple addition of lights and darks. You've seen me do that several times, so there's nothing particularly clever about that. What we're going to look at now, as soon as this paint has dried thoroughly, is to put in a little bit of texture that will represent the pan tiles, and a little bit more texture on the thatch, and then just 1 or 2 stones or bricks here and there, just to represent the texture of the building materials that have been used in these cottages. But before I do that, what I'm just going to do is fill in this roof here, and this little garden area, some trees, and this little wall, which is important because it's going to catch some nice light on top of the wall coming down from the sun here. Right, what I'm doing now is just a little hint of some of the tiles that's in the roof here. You'll find as ever that these will tone down very shortly into a much more acceptable colour, rather more subtle than we have at the moment, but certainly it'll look like you've got a roof full of tiles without you having to paint each individual one. Right, now you can see that I'm just developing these tiles a little bit. As I said, I've not painted by any means every single tile, there's no need to, but what's useful is to perhaps catch or get the edge of the sun catching the edge of a few tiles round the edge of the roof like that. Okay, and I'm going to leave that like that. I'm going to work my way down. The thatch obviously will come to as a separate exercise. The pan tiles are a little bit different, but all we're going to do really, as you've seen me do with the other pan tile exercises, is to drag some different colours down the length of the roof and create that distinct wavy pattern. Right, now you can see in producing this pan tile pattern, I'm just using the rig and I'm dragging some dark colour down. If you look closely, you can probably just see that orangey colour that I've already put in. It's started to sort of settle back into the paint that's already on. I'm now going to go in with a bigger brush, well, slightly bigger brush than number 1, and I'm going to get some dry brush, some thick paint, quite bright orange as you can see, perhaps not quite so bright, and then by taking out the thick of the paint and dragging it down, we should start to get some nice hit and miss effects. Now one other thing we can do is to just dab across very gently. It's a very, very subtle effect, this. You're just basically imagining that the end of the pan tiles are here and that each set of tiles is overlapping the next. Right, a couple of little things I want to show you. You can see that I've finished the pan tiles. I've dragged in some lights and darks just to make the thatched a little more convincing, and I've tidied up some of the windows as well and some of the doors. And I'm going to put some light areas here in a minute where the sun's shining. But this is a sort of situation you've got to keep an eye on. Now that I've painted in the roof of this middle distance house down the hill, I've lightened it off next to the dark area here to make sure I've got counter change, but I've darkened it there against this light area here to make sure the counter change also works just as well. Right, you can see that I'm just using put some dark colour on the trees just to give us a nice little dark background. Remember, the sun's coming from this side, so I've just added a little tree in here and there, another one down in this little somebody's backyard here. Now, the only other thing that I'm going to do is just lighten these highlights on the chimneys and on the top and front edges of the buildings, on the roofs, and then once I've done that, I'm going to bring the street in. We'll come back up the street and then we'll be done. Okay, all but there. We're just putting in some of the intense highlights from a bright sun. These are just catching the corner of the building like that, and on the roof there. And we're all but there now. I must just put in the shadows on the of the chimneys on the rooftop, and I'm just going to use one colour which is basically raw umber with a little of ultramarine blue. And if we look at the way that these shadows fall, they're falling down across the chimney like that, or across the roof rather, like that. Right, well there we are. I've just about completed this now, and I think we're all ready to go home and have our tea. I'm just putting some little extra highlight in the middle of the road, just to, as if the sun is catching the road coming up the hill. I'm leaving it in a little bit of shadow here just to help to push the view back down the lane. There's one or two other things I could do, which is just to tidy up these fence posts and just lighten them off a bit, and I'll do that again and I'll show you the final finished product. But I hope you found that useful, that you've had a lot of things to pick up in this exercise, not least the very severe perspective. You've had things like the textures of cottages, thatched roofs, tiled roofs, pan tile roofs, light falling on buttresses, distant fields where they get bluer and greyer far away, and least of all, or not least of all, the fact that you're painting a sunny scene without any sky. So there we are. There's Gold Hill in Shaftesbury in Dorset, and I hope you have a go at that, because if you take your time, It's a very, very pleasant picture to produce and not at all difficult, as I showed at the outset with you. Just 4 big blocks of colour to fill in to create these beautiful cottages. Gold Hill in Shaftesbury. Right, we've got Gold Hill. Well, first of all, I cannot believe I forgot to put the shadows and the dark areas on these railings coming up the hill, and I also omitted to put any sort of texture and little hint of stones and what have you on the roadway. I've made that wall, or the top of that wall down there, more obvious and more lit, so it stands out better against this background building here. But I've also put a little bit of light on this roof so it splits it better from this tree in the background. I've done a little bit of work on this thatch as well, so that looks a little bit tidy and a little bit more convincing. But the biggest change I made, and this again is a good example of where you're always best to test a painting by putting it, even if it's only a temporary frame, that when I put this in the frame, this chimney was about ½ an inch higher, so it finished just as it touched the edge of the frame. Not a good idea at all, so I've painted that back. And the other thing I did was to tidy up some of the verticals, because when we compared them against the side of the frame, some of the verticals were somewhat less than vertical. So it's an easy matter when you're comparing with the frame to change those as you're going along. Well, I hope you found those lessons instructive and above all enjoyable. The main thing is you've now got a whole armoury of techniques to produce any sort of building or any group of buildings that you want out of any sort of material that you like. Okay, the next DVD, DVD 7, is all about figures and animals and what I call artifacts. It's all those little details such as boats and cranes and telegraph poles, garden rollers and the like, the sort of things that when you put them in a picture add detail and bring the whole scene to life. So let's move on now to DVD 7.